Let's have a look at the variation of the exchange variation of the Zemish in which white is taking a pawn, and we have to prove that we have enough compensation for that. So d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, f3. I mean, short castle, bishop e3, c5, and dc5 now. We have to take dc5. So, what is the background of this line? I mean, it's not a real problem for black. I mean, it's by computer point of view, by theory point of view, white has nothing. But psychologically, you might have a little bit of disturbance, because you can be disturbed a little bit, because you're pawn down, there is an endgame, your typical Kingsinian attacks and ideas are not exactly working here. It's a different type of position. And it looks like more like, this exchange variation in Leroy Lopez or Bishop b5 check in this Sicilian. One white is trying to minimize the risks and to take control over the situation by, they know normally the players who play this, they know it very well with white, and they kind of happy with draw sometimes also. That's annoying a little bit, but if you accept draw, if you do some study yourself and improve your knowledge in this line, then even sometimes with small inaccuracies from white side you can overtake the initiatives. But need a little bit of knowledge. That's exactly what I'm going to offer you here with this chapter. So let's see. I think bishop c5 here, it's a way to confuse ourselves, but we don't take on d1, we don't do anything, we develop knight c6, after queen d8, rook d8, it will be transposition. If he wants to keep the queens, it's a big mistake from his side, because after knight d7, bishop f2, knight b6, queen a3, we have very nice take on c3. And we change the picture, because if queen c3, knight a4, and queen a5 check, and if bc3, then bishop e6, and we already play like in Nimzovich for the weaknesses on the white squares. So he cannot really control both, have both the pawn, extra pawn, and the queens on the board. On bishop e3 here, also we would continue with knight d7, very typical move for this pawn sacrifice type of position, and followed by queen a5, rook d8, and knight c5. Already the position looks very nice for black. That was Geffon's game against Lugi. Knight g2, we can already jump immediately to a5. And again, same plan, bishop e3, rook d8, queen c1, because otherwise the knight would come to b4 to d3 with tempo. And here, knight h5 with idea f5. It's extremely strong. That was played in a few games, like Paul Gailsky, Jinjihad series, 74 in Graf Zulfugarli 2003, and with excellent play for black. Beside the sidelines, we can also name this e5 move here on the move 8. Just need to know, because as I teach my son, who is 7 years old, first you have to check in the position, check, takes, and attacks. So e5, you of course should check first of all, but after knight fd7, f4, you have to know only one small point here, the move f6, the attack of the cape of the pawn chain. In this case, we destroy the center. e6 is not good enough because of knight b6, and later we take this pawn on e6. And if not e6, then he can try here ef6, but that's even better for us, because we take with the rook on f6, and after rook d6, knight c6, knight d4, we have an excellent play. Well, that's not about playing e5, this or taking bishop c5. Of course, they will take all after dc5. They all will take here on d8, rook d8, and they will take the pawn. This is for sure. We play knight c6. So now we postponed our attack for the next move, knight d7. First we finish development and defend the pawn on e7. Yeah, here you have several moves for and several plans for white. Let's try with we'll start with the move bishop a3. White wants to keep free hand to decide later how he will put the other pieces, but immediately he takes away the bishop from tempo from b6 or knight d7. In this case, the excellent idea, I just remember against this bishop a3, it's of course misplayed. The excellent idea is to play a5. This always typical idea in all the positions to come with knight b4. So this is creating new possibilities for the black knight. So now if knight d5, let's say knight takes d5, c d5, knight b4, and already we can see that even we play next move e6, we destroy this and open all bishops, and we are already very comfortable. A long castle, for example, after e6, it's possible also knight e2, but e6 maybe it's even stronger. This was Beliavsky non-game, and I think black overtook the initiative already here at this moment. So we saw how this a5 together with knight b4 is working. On knight d5, if here rook d1, and then a bishop e6, it's a little bit about understanding what is, because always white's main idea is to put the knight on d5 and to understand exactly how to react for black on this knight on d5, because after taking he still has this nice strong pawn on d5, so we might be confused a little bit by this fact. But there is always reaction. For example, here, if he takes rook d8, and plays knight d5 now, then he takes his bishop on d5, c d5, and knight b4. And this is not all, because there is one nice tactical idea. After bishop b5, knight c2, king f2, here, using the fact that this bishop is unprotected, we have a tempo, we can take on d5, e d5, rook d5. Bishop c4, rook d4, attacking the bishop. Bishop e2, rook d4, bishop e2, knight a3, ba3, and rook a2. We will take this both pawns for sure, and most probably black will have some small initiative continue. Well, that's already one line, and which proves that white is not fast enough in his development after rook d8. Also, on knight h3, we can just say here that after 11 bishop e6, if he goes knight h3, we can include already this move knight b4, on which he has to, if he takes on b4, of course it's in our favor, so he has to bring, his idea was to bring the knight to f4, but after knight c2, we have a nice tactical motive. King f2, knight e4 check, a brilliant check. Fe, bishop c3, rook d8, rook d8, and the bishop on a3 is hanging. So you see the combination. What I like, for example, this position, it's all pieces into the play, and these small skills, some small calculations, we can always prove some initiative. And the price for the pawn is not that high. The pawn is not that high price for such initiative. Let's examine other plans instead of 11 rook d1. He might also rook d1, bishop e6, instead of 12 rook d8 and knight h3, he might immediately take on d8. Yeah, 12 rook d8 we checked, and 12 knight d5. Yeah, that's main line. Here we make a little pause in order to better understand the moment and to remember exactly at which moment it works. And this is exactly the right moment for us to play knight b4. Of course, this is already played many times, but it's always good to remember what to do after knight d5, knight b4. Now he has several takes. First of all, he can take on e7. Then we have to go, of course, back to h8, just not to get under the spin of the bishop, so not to afraid to h8. Rook d8, and it looks like after rook d8 he can come back knight d5, and he's happy with 2 pawns up. Here, of course, the crushing knight d5, it's coming this idea after knight c2, king f2, knight a3, ba3. White is now 2 pawns up, so let's give him the third one, playing b5. This is really amazing, but of course he cannot keep this the pawns, and later we will take back everything. If he takes on d5, of course, we take on d5 and continue taking till the end. So let's try for them to finish development. Then we take on c4, bishop c4, and now, of course, not taking on d5, but this subtle move, change the file, play rook c8, because on bishop b3 we have another sacrifice, a4, and nowadays all this correspondence guy, they finished here the games to draw already, because after changing all the pieces. So we discussed a very important move, bishop a3, and practically in all lines we saw that we put a5 and knight b4. Let's continue with 10 knight g2. In this case, we push back his bishop to a3, and using the fact that we have the square of b7, we already just simply finished development with bishop to b7. Here a little bit we change the picture. We do have these different plans. One of them is with knight d7. For example, after rook d1, he cannot castle already anymore on to the long side. So then we go knight d7. We close our file, d file, because we don't need to stop this king anymore. Knight d5, knight d5, attacking on c4, knight ec3, e6, and I would say that it's risky to put the knight to c7, because after rook d1, knight d1, rook d8, he has to already run away with knight b5, a6, knight bc3, knight d4 with total domination. I mean, this is really very strong position. So we saw this 12 rook d1 here after bishop b7. He can also try to jump here immediately, knight d5. Then typical move, one of the typical reaction on knight d5 is to play e6 in this type of position. He has to go for exchange of the pieces, which is not that bad for us. Bishop e7, rook d7, bishop b4, rook c8. So here I introduce you new target, the pawn on c4. Also, of course, we keep in mind always this diagonal. We can always make pressure on this diagonal. Knight c3. And a new idea for us in this endgame is knight h5. It's a double sense. It has 2 points, this move, knight h5. One is to bring the knight to f4 and to make pressure, on this potential pressure on this bishop and on the pawn on g2. But another, maybe even more important idea is to include this pawn f5 into the play to make pressure on e4. If he will take, we will increase the length of our bishop's diagonal, and also we can create a potential of moving the pawns in the center. But you see now these two bishops are working very well, together, as well as the rooks. So, he has to be careful of equalizing here. After knight h5, rook d1, we keep the pressure by playing rook c d8, keep the file, rook d7, rook d7. Actually, what I learned from computers, and of course not only me, the importance, we know it from very little, but with computers it becomes much more clear and evident and obvious that the files are really important in the chess game, because it's number of squares controlled. And that's why we have to keep fighting for this file. After g3, bishop d4, bishop a3, f5, we have full compensation. Let's do one more line here in this position. Immediately move on move 10. One day jump, knight d5. Maybe this is the most ambitious way of treating this position. On knight d5, we have to give him a second pawn. Actually, this is a challenge. But meanwhile, we open our bishop and create this pressure on b2 on a1. So he has to, after knight e7, knight e7, bishop e7. We have very important intermediate move. Please remember this, because otherwise we will be simply after rook e8, bishop a3, we just pawn two pawns down. But like this, we are only one pawn down, so in this case it's easier for us to obtain the compensation. Rook b1, bishop c3 check. King f2, bishop d4 check. So king e1, it's a repetition. Yeah. He can also take immediately on e7 with the bishop after knight d7. In this case, he really takes two pawns. Knight e7, knight e7. In this case, since the bishop is absent on a3, we can afford to play king f8. Knight c8, we always keep in mind this bishop b2 intermediate move, so knight d5. Bishop b2, rook b1, and bishop g7. So, yes, he has a pawn up, he has an extra and a very strong knight on d5, but there are ways for us to play this position. First of all, of course, we have full control over the black squares. So let's try to use this fact. Let's say he goes here knight h3. Sorry, first we go back bishop g7, knight h3, knight c5, knight f2. Yeah, here we can immediately play f5, but this is one plan. I prefer first to finish development by playing bishop e6, bishop e2, rook ac8, all pieces into the play, short castle b6. Looks like we don't want anything in this position. This is not exactly true. First point is that for him it's not easier to gain some space, some new squares. Immediately the moment he starts to move his pawns like f4, he can face the problems after bishop d4. So he has to be careful. He can make here very natural standard move, rook c1. And here, please remember this moment. This is very strong move. This is knight a4 here. The point is that we already keep in mind the c3 square for our knight, which knight on a4 works together, collaborates very well with the bishop on g7. And we're preparing, beside this knight c3 idea, sometimes knight b2. So it's some dynamics in the air already. For example, some unexpected move after knight d1 can be bishop h6, and already after rook c2 we can take twice on d5. In the game on correspondence, Amico Nefedov went here rook b4 after knight a4, bishop d5. Sorry, this bishop h6 is clear. After knight a4, he played rook b4. Black took on d5, rook a4, and now sympathical move like b5, rook b4, bishop e6, rook b5, rook d2 is clear advantage for black. So let's make some conclusions on the whole setup with exchange variation, and when they try to hold the pawn in the endgame. First of all, we always bring the knight to c6. Second, we keep in mind this maneuver of knight d7. If he puts the bishop to a3, then usually very strong is a5 and knight b4, with few ideas. One of them, the main ideas, of course, is to play knight c2, and the other is to close this bishop. How to deal with this knight d5? Usually we are on some stages we are ignoring it, especially when immediately he jumps knight d5. So we have this knight d7 attacking, counter-attacking on b2, which is a key point of this move, knight d7. Sometimes after knight d5, cd5, we can break the structure by playing e6 and opening the center. Sometimes we simply push him back by playing e6, exchanging on f6 or something, and then attacking on c4 and using the squares, the weakened squares. Many times we use these weakened squares, the black squares. One of the important things is if he's playing like slow, we can go with also slow plan with b6, bishop b7, knight d7, knight e5, f5, knight c5. I mean, there are plenty of ideas for us to keep the initiative and have full compensation for the sacrificed pawn.